You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, Fan2Fan Podcast guests and all-stars Allen and John return, and we're talking about, you guessed it, John Carpenter. They're going to share some of their favorite Carpenter movies and more. Here we go. John Carpenter, a name that I think anytime we're ever recording seems to come up. So we've talked about how you can't play a drinking game with the Fan2Fan podcast and have John Carpenter not mentioned, because you will be drunk by the end of that episode, because John Carpenter was a big part of us growing up. Halloween, The Thing, Escape from New York, Assault on Precinct 13. So do you have any thoughts, John, on John Carpenter and his movies?
I do, and it's funny because it's kind of all over the place. Some of it is because I was not all in on his movies early. To be honest with you, I knew he made Halloween. I knew he made The Thing. Big Trouble, I saw on cable, like HBO. I didn't get it at the time. It actually took a few watches for me to get the shtick of it, because I was just, expecting more goofy, laugh out loud, airplane type humor. So I didn't really get that one at first, but Halloween just scared the crap out of me as a kid. And there was something about it that I knew how much I loved it. I was not a cinephile at the time. So it's looking back on some of these films, it's amazing to me. And I'm starting to watch more Carpenter now, because I've probably only seen a handful of his films. So I recently watched Assault on
Precinct 13.
Precinct 13.
For the gang called Street Thunder, it is a day of vengeance. It's war in the streets. It's terror in the night. It's the most shattering assault on a police station in history.
They're not afraid to die. Any of them want to rip us apart, no matter what it costs.
Assault on Precinct 13, rated R.
I'm ashamed to admit, but I only saw Escape from New York the first time 2 years ago. That was one that was always out of the video store. There was only one copy, so I just didn't see it. And I could not believe how much fun that movie was, how amazing it is. And what I think one of the things that sticks out to me is what this man could do with $1. Some people talk about being low budget directors and this and that, and this guy great, but Carpenter is just the best at it, including the music. But my God, across a lot of the films that I've seen, just absolutely blown away by his writing and his style and his ability to create tension, to create scares without having to show you everything. And that was something that I was amazed with Assault as well.
Allen, John just mentioned video stores, and you worked at a video store, so maybe you should be familiar with John Carpenter. So what are your thoughts on the Master of the Macabre?
So Carpenter, I think one of the things that stands out about him is his sort of versatility in filmmaking, right? He can give you horror, he can give you thriller, he can give you bizarre comedy, like Big Trouble in Little China, that just is an action comedy that I think was different from anything he had done up to that point. Halloween was sort of, I don't think anybody expected Halloween to go, to where it went. It was almost kind of a low budget movie that was just done so well with storytelling and cinematography and use of music that it crushed. But Carpenter he runs the gamut from the 70s into the 80s. There's a Carpenter style, a grittiness, but you're almost kind of shocked sometimes as you're, gaining knowledge of movies that you're oh my God, John Carpenter did this movie too.
In 1977, Voyager 2 was launched into space, inviting all life forms in the universe to visit our planet. In 1984, someone accepted our invitation. Get ready. Company's coming. John Carpenter's Starman.
He did this as well, Starman. You're shocked to find out that he did Starman, but then it makes sense once you know that it was him. So for me, Big Trouble in Little China was the first time I came across John Carpenter movie. I was a kid. My family had literally just gotten all the pay channels, and Big Trouble in Little China was whipping around HBO. And I saw Big Trouble in Little China probably more times than, any like 8-year-old boy should see it. And I was just in love with it. I love his use of color, the characters, like Jack Burton is just such a big, memorable character. And Kim Cattrall, who I knew from Mannequin, it stuck with me forever. Big Trouble in Little China, it was always something that I turned to. It was something that when I worked at a video store later in life, I would recommend to people. I'd be like, have you seen Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China? Have you seen Starman, which was another movie from my childhood, which I, had watched with my family a few years after it was released. Starman was one of those magical movies that sort of sucked you in. It's just done with such care, right? Like for Karen Allen's character, and for Bridges' alien that like doesn't realize what he means to Karen Allen's character until, probably halfway through the movie. I have a greater appreciation for him now than I ever did when I was younger, because I look back on the bigger parts of his career. And like when I was coming into my own, when I was working at a video store, like Carpenter was sort of at that point where he was a legend and he was doing things like Vampires and Ghosts of Mars. I'm not a huge fan of Ghosts of Mars, but I think Vampires is one of the most underrated vampire movies from that era when when Tarantino brought it back with From Dusk Till Dawn and everybody started doing a vampire movie. Carpenter came to the table with vampires and James Woods and Gross, Daniel Baldwin, and you were like, he still got it, right? Like, wow, like this movie is very, very much in his unique style, which is just no style at all, but all his own, if that makes sense. So yeah, just a huge fan of like the mid Carpenter work, and as John pointed out, the escape movies. So I saw Escape from LA in the 90s. I didn't really ever think I needed to see Escape from New York because I didn't think Escape from LA was that great. And then I watched Escape from New York with a stranger friends, and I was like, this fucking movie is amazing. And like, I wish I had paid more attention to it. Because it would have been on my rotation. It would have been in my picks when I worked at the video store. I mean, it's phenomenal. And his sort of pairing with Kurt Russell, ranks up there with any of the great director actor pairings of all time, I think.
Something both of you guys talked about is the versatility. I like something like Big Trouble in Little China is fun, silly, like afternoon matinee kind of fun movie. And then you get something like Starman that is very sweet, very considered. Karen Allen's character, like Bridges, their interaction, but like the direction of the movie. Like I remember first time I saw it, I'm like, this is a sweet movie. Wait, John Carpenter did this? Wait, that guy who did who did The Thing? So I'm glad you brought that up. Pete, you saw Assault on Precinct 13 for the first time, like in the last year. You're watching a Carpenter movie now that maybe young Pete would have caught on cable as well back in the day. Now that you just saw it recently, John, I'm wondering, what do you think of Assault? Since now you've got some Carpenter movies under your belt, and now you're adding one of his earliest, if not his second movie after Dark Star.
One of the things I loved about it had that claustrophobic feel of The Thing a little bit. Very different, obviously, very different setting. But I like that he sought out to make a small movie in basically one location. A guy in the wrong place at the wrong time on his first day of work, if you will, and everything goes south. And I was really impressed just by how tense and how fun the action was and how gritty it felt. It definitely has, a little bit of that Warriors feel of just that, Devil's Night kind of shit. You can't control, and like the phone is out and these people are trapped. So I liked that he played on that horror feel a little bit. He had that good tension, and I did like the characters and like what they represented. It gave me the slightest feel of Night of the Living Dead. Really, really enjoyed it, and especially at how quick it was. It was over. It seemed like it was over in the blink of an eye.
And John, I may or may not blow your mind with this, but the guy that plays the older cop in Assault on Precinct 13, that actor is Henry Brandon, a.k.a. Mr. Barnaby from March of the Wooden Soldiers.
What? Get the hell out of here. Oh, my God. There's no way I would have recognized it. He looks so different in the March movie.
Yep, not like John Carpenter's March of the Wooden Soldiers, just to be clear.
No.
Different movie.
Yeah.
Alan, I was going to ask you then, if you have to pick one favorite Carpenter movie, and like you said, you've seen all of them. You've even seen like the 90s stuff that, gets really underrated, because I'm with you there. Vampires, just a good, gritty, like kind of like Western style action movie, but you got to pick one. You're in your video store, Alan, that you run, and you got one slot for Carpenter. What are you picking?
Oh, I mean, I'm going right back to Big Trouble in Little China.
Remember the name Jack Burton.
Who? Jack Burton. Me. Where's Jack?
Jack!
Everybody relax, I'm here.
How are you going to spring us?
I have no idea.
He's coming to rescue your summer.
Hey, what more can a guy ask for?
Big Trouble in Little China. Rated PG-13. Starts.
I mean, I would love to tell you The Fog. I would love to tell you The Thing. And I mean, they're stacked in there right behind Big Trouble in Little China. But there's something about that movie that I think brings in all the elements of every movie he's ever done, right? Because he has this ability to sort of bring you into his world, which is a little different than reality. Think about like in the Mouth of Madness. He's really good at bringing you into his dream world, right? Where nothing feels. You're watching his movie and you're like, this feels off. This is making me nervous. Like, I don't think he was ever better than that into the Mouth of Madness. Like that is one of the most tense movies I think that like you'll ever watch. And like, as far as like a person losing their mind over the course of a film. But yeah, I mean, my one movie, Big Trouble in Little China, it has the magical elements. It has like weird like little moments of being a horror movie. It has action, it has martial arts, throwbacks, big bright like neon characters and one-liners, and there's just nothing about Big Trouble in Little China that gets old. Every time you see it, you have a little bit better respect for it. I laugh at Burton's one-liners now like harder every time I see them, because I just like, I have such appreciation for the way that Russell like chews up the lines and spits them out, and like you can tell he's having a blast. Like the costumes are forever. So yeah, it's Big Trouble in Little China.
John, Ellen just shook the pillars of heaven, so you got to pick your Carpenter movie for John's picks on the video store.
Well, and this is why I love this podcast so much, because while we were having this discussion, I actually realized how much John Carpenter's Halloween and The Thing. Halloween is definitely my favorite of all time. It's my favorite horror movie of all time. The Thing, I feel like, might be his best early movie.
Its origin, alien. Location, Antarctica. Age, unknown. Intent, survival. Destination, man. John Carpenter's The Thing, the ultimate in alien terror. Rated R. Starts Friday.
One of the things that I realize now is Pete knows this, I've always loved movies that are like in these secluded areas, whether they're horror movies or dramas or mysteries. Usually mystery and horror works the best for me. Let the Right One In, even like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, these movies where it's like you have the snow or you have some obstacle where you're definitely not getting out. So there is no option of escape. It's just survival or a mystery. And I just absolutely love that. And he created it for me, that feel for me. So now every time I see a movie like that, and I'm like, I love Let the Right One In with all the snow and that there's no place to go and it's a small town. All of those movies have that feel back to The Thing, or just that one strip of houses in Halloween. So it's amazing how an artist can do that. And that's something we'll carry with you for the rest of your life.
Love it. All right, Pete, before you share your favorite, give you a few seconds to think about this. One thing I did want to ask you, John, is as a musician, and since John Carpenter very much does the music, and, that's a really big part of like his career, why he is known.
Yeah, I actually, as a kid, none of us really knew, when we were really little, that he made the music even for Halloween. Like, we didn't really know anything about soundtracks and stuff like that. So as I got older and I realized he did the music for most of his films, or a lot of his films, I've just been absolutely blown away Just the creativity, again, what he does with a little bit. Halloween theme is not this big giant score, but he stays in this creepy area and keeps repeating it. Watching Escape from New York with these guys for the first time a few years ago, I fell in love with the soundtrack to that film because it's just so sci-fi, weird, interesting, great atmosphere to it. So it is. The guy is just so talented as a writer, director, musician. I just, he's definitely a gift to all of us.
All right, Pete. John bought you a few minutes there, maybe. So Pete's picks.
I for many years I would go back and forth between Halloween and The Thing. In recent years, again, no disrespect to Halloween, but for me, The Thing, I think, keeps rising to the top of the charts for me with John Carpenter. There's just something about it. That movie was embedded in my brain before I ever saw it. I remember seeing the trailer in the theater and being scared shitless just from the trailer part of it. I just distinctly remember the part with the floorboards like shooting up. And I'm like, I don't know, this looks insane. And of course, that was 82. So I was 10 years old. And, we've talked about on this show before, The Thing suffered from coming out at the same time as E.T. And so I was in the theater being 10 to seeing E.T. like 2 or 3 times and crying, my eyes out. But then discovering The Thing a short time later, because in the 80s, having illegal cable when your dad's an electrician and brings it home. John and I's dad both would bring the illegal cable boxes home.
And we're both electricians.
So speaking to what John was saying about the talking of isolation, I think what also resonates with me with The Thing is it's the isolation, but it's also there's nowhere to go. So you've got to deal with the problem one way or the other. And I think there's something going on there that I can personally relate to because, growing up myself, and so, we've all experienced things in our lives where it's easier to just ignore the situation or put things off. That's the easy way out. But when you're stuck in a situation, you don't trust the person next to you, but you've got nowhere else to go. So you've got to deal with this one way or the other. There's something working again that Carpenter does on that subconscious level that just hits home. To say nothing about the amazing practical effects by Rob Bottin, even for the time, who knew that you could have such grotesque images on the screen that, you wanted to cover your eyes, but you couldn't look away from. And that's just, grown in stature and if anything has been enhanced with the over-reliance and just the such reliance on CGI. You can't replicate that texture, the realness of that. And so if anything, that even elevates The Thing even more than it did. Always fascinated, at how that movie has become regarded almost universally as one of the scariest horror sci-fi movies of all time when it was almost universally trashed when it came out. I just remember the reviews being, this is just gross for being gross sake.
Our next film, The Thing, has already caused a lot of talk before it has opened. About 2 weeks ago, something very unusual happened to me. I began getting postcards at my newspaper office from readers telling me that John Carpenter's new movie, I guess they'd seen it in a preview, was one of the most disgusting films ever made. Well, those postcard writers certainly were right about one thing. The movie The Thing does contain a lot of repellent special effects, telling the story of a creature that is discovered in the Antarctic by a team of American scientists. The Thing is based on the same book that was used in a 1952 movie also called The Thing, and there is a similarity between the two films, with both having the subtext of a Cold War mentality, suspicion of strangers. This part of The Thing is not disgusting at all, I think. Actually, it's quite intriguing. Later, there's a terrific blood test where they try and check out who is human, who is not. I wish this movie were less ugly than it is, because in terms of storytelling and suspense, and that subtext of suspicion of one's fellow man, this is actually a very well-made movie. But at regular intervals, no doubt about it, it does gross one out. So, a mixed review for The Thing from me. I'm going to recommend it, but serve notice that a lot of people who see it will be made sick by it.
I think that's probably an understatement. I would call this the barf bag movie of July. I have some problems with it. One of them is, I think, the characters. They're not made into three-dimensional people. Their function is to walk down the corridor and be jumped on. The other thing is plausibility. Once they figure out that this thing can turn into one of them, they ought to institute a watertight buddy system, but instead they have all kinds of loopholes. People walk out into the snow, come back with a grin on their face, so that the story is totally implausible, and the movie just basically is an excuse for this very gruesome and repellent creature to gross us out. It is the most nauseating thing I've ever seen on a movie screen.
And then to have that massive shift in tone from people that were not the film critics that went and saw it and were really impacted by it, and then grew up and had the voice that they didn't have when they were younger, has really elevated it. And for me, it hands down the Thing is my number one.
I love the evolution. Young Pete phoned home and ate Reese's Pieces, and present day Pete wants to grow up to be McCready with whiskey in hand and sombrero on his head.
And I want to play my computer chess game and be able to throw my glass of whiskey into it when it cheats on me.
My move. Rook to knight 6. Checkmate. Checkmate.
Cheating bitch.